I married a billionaire to destroy him from the inside. But he knew the entire time. Welcome to a world where silence has eyes, wealth hides weaponry, and love is just another mask. I was the perfect wife, until I found the encrypted files that proved he murdered my father. He studied me like a project, turned my allies into spies, and buried his secrets in a windowless basement. But now I've flipped the game. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a slow, surgical takedown of a man who thought he could control everything. He created a monster, and now she's coming for him. Welcome to the Skillful Art of Manipulation podcast. If you haven't already, please consider following us on your favorite podcast platform. Today we present to you the Housewife Agenda. Let's dive into this thrilling narrative together. Chapter 1. The Welcome Mat Lies. I used to think silence was peaceful, gentle, like a warm bath after a long day. But in this house, silence isn't gentle. It's heavy, like a breath you hold too long, like the pause before a scream. Here, silence is calculated, designed, staged. Every room echoes with the absence of truth. And if you listen long enough, you realize it's not silent at all. It hums. It breathes. It waits. The first time I stepped foot inside the Hamilton estate, I felt the chill in my bones. Not from the air. Oh no, the temperature was perfect, calibrated by a smart system synced to Jonathan's preferences. No, the chill came from the house itself. From the way the walls seemed to whisper secrets too old to be remembered. From the way every surface gleamed too brightly, like it was trying to distract you from the rot underneath. Jonathan greeted me at the door that day, his posture perfect, his suit crisp. He wore wealth the way others wear armor. Effortlessly. Distantly. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, and I didn't flinch. I'd practiced that moment too many times. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hamilton," he said, his voice low, composed, and utterly unreadable. I smiled, the kind of smile that took years to perfect. Not too eager, not too cold. Just enough to pass as grateful. Just enough to hide the storm beneath my skin. "It's everything I dreamed of," I whispered. Lie number 1. This wasn't a dream. It was the opening move in a long game. I married Jonathan for one reason: revenge. Not love. Not comfort. Certainly not companionship. I married him to destroy him. Slowly. Strategically. From the inside out. He didn't know that, of course. At least, I didn't think he did. Back then, I believed I had the upper hand. I believed I was the one playing him. Every dinner party, every gala, every morning I spent lounging on our sun-soaked terrace in silk robes and forced smiles. I thought I was weaving my way deeper into the walls of his empire. That I was becoming essential. But now I'm starting to think the web was already spun. And I'm the one tangled in it. Jonathan Hamilton isn't a man. He's a fortress. Impeccably dressed. Impossibly calm. A billionaire with no warmth and too many eyes. His empire spans continents, private equity, tech firms, real estate monopolies, and some offshore holdings that don't exist on paper. People call him a genius. I call him a ghost with a bank account. We met at a fundraiser for an art museum I couldn't care less about. I was serving champagne. He was buying wings of the building with a smirk. I dropped a bottle, on purpose, of course, and cursed loud enough to catch his attention. He looked at me like I was a puzzle. And men like Jonathan don't walk away from puzzles. I gave him just enough of me to keep him interested. A carefully tailored past. A fake degree. A tragic backstory with just the right amount of darkness. I made him feel like a savior. Like a man who'd rescued a broken girl and turned her into a queen. The irony still tastes sweet. He proposed 3 months later. I said yes with tears in my eyes, and a prenup I planned to unravel clause by clause. The house was part of the package. Hamilton Estate, 27 rooms, manicured lawns, private security, a wine cellar that could drown a small country. But the most impressive part? The silence. The kind that presses on your chest. The kind that makes you question what you thought you knew. For 2 years, I played the role perfectly. I attended charity luncheons, organized meaningless fundraisers, hosted yoga sessions in the garden for other wives who smiled too wide and drank too much. I was the picture of poise. Behind closed doors, I was building a network. Offshore accounts. Anonymous trusts. Digital breadcrumbs that led nowhere. I funneled money slowly, steadily. A few thousand here. A forged signature there. He had so much it didn't even register. Or so I thought. The staff never questioned me. Most of them were new hires. The ones who'd been here before me didn't last long. I made sure of that. If someone asked too many questions, I found a reason to replace them. This was war, and I didn't need casualties who might talk. Then came the study. Jonathan's study was the only room in the house I wasn't allowed to enter. A rule he never said out loud but made perfectly clear. The door was always closed. The handle always cool. I told myself I didn't care, that it didn't matter. Until last week. It was a Thursday. He left for the city in a rush. Board meeting, he said. Something about investors. He kissed my forehead like he was blessing a child and disappeared into his waiting car. I waited exactly 12 minutes before I moved. Just enough time for the gates to close and the staff to resume their routines. I walked barefoot to the study. The door, surprisingly, was unlocked. Inside, everything was sterile. Dark wood, books with unread pages. A laptop on the desk, still warm. I hesitated only a second before I pulled a flash drive from my pocket. Custom-made, disguised as a vintage lipstick tube. Marcus gave it to me. A ghost from my past. Hacker. Occasional lover. The only man who ever scared me a little. Insert it, he said. It'll mirror the drive. You'll have access to everything. Just don't get caught. The progress bar blinked onto the screen. 20%. 40. 80. Then the screen flickered. Just for a heartbeat. I froze. Did I trigger something? Then it was done. Complete. I pulled the drive, wiped the keyboard, and backed out of the room like I'd never been there. But as I turned the corner, I saw it. The hallway camera. Blinking red. Had it always blinked red? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. Wondering if he knew. If he was awake under those closed lids. If this was the moment everything unraveled. The next morning after he left, I locked the bedroom door and plugged the flash drive into my own laptop. Folders. Dozens of them. But one stood out. Wife number 3, Contingency Plan. Inside were files. Surveillance photos. Old aliases. A transcript of a psychiatric evaluation I'd buried years ago. And one final folder, encrypted. Her father's death. I clicked. Password protected. My hands trembled. My breath hitched. He knew. He's always known. I thought I was infiltrating his empire. But I was walking into a carefully constructed trap. One I never saw coming. And now the game has changed. He's not just a target anymore. He's the hunter. And I think he's been waiting for me to make my move all along. Chapter 2, The Wife Files. I didn't touch the flash drive again for 2 days. I couldn't. Every time I thought about opening that encrypted folder labeled her father's death, I felt my throat tighten, like someone had wrapped their hand around my neck and was slowly squeezing. My past wasn't supposed to resurface. It was dead, buried, bought and paid for. But Jonathan had it. All of it. I spent those 2 days pretending, smiling, hosting brunch for the Garden Society, chatting about shrub pruning and rose fungus like I didn't feel the walls breathing around me. I wore a cream dress with delicate lace cuffs, a symbol of purity and wealth. My laugh was rehearsed, my tone measured, my posture perfect. That was how you survived here. Through performance. Through mask after mask until you forgot which face was yours. And Jonathan? He acted like nothing had changed. He came home at his usual time, kissed my cheek in that cold, obligatory way, poured himself a glass of scotch, and scrolled through his phone like I wasn't even there. But I knew better. I knew what it meant when he lingered in the doorway before entering a room. When his eyes slid toward the hallway camera as he passed. He was watching, waiting, measuring his move. I thought I was careful. I thought I'd been one step ahead. But that folder told a different story. It told me he'd known who I was before I ever slipped into his orbit. On the third night, after I made sure the cameras in our wing were temporarily offline for their scheduled update, a little gift from Marcus, I locked the door, closed the blinds, and opened the drive again. I didn't go straight to the encrypted folder. I needed to understand the extent of his surveillance first. Needed to brace for what was coming. The folder labeled Wife Number 3, Contingency Plan, opened with a list of subfolders, each dated and tagged. Initial assessment, psychological profile, financial tracking, alias backgrounds, prenuptial strategy, emotional stability, red flags. I clicked on initial assessment. There were notes, scanned handwritten ones, typed transcripts, and surveillance photos. One from the fundraiser where we first met. I was mid-laugh, head tilted, arm extended to a guest. Below it, a note in his handwriting. Charming, calculated, eyes scan room frequently. Potential ulterior motives. Requires observation. I clicked the next. A video file. Blurry bar footage. Me years ago in New York. Bartending. laughing with Marcus. I felt my stomach twist. I had no idea I'd already been on his radar back then. Long before the art museum. Long before the proposal. Another file. My birth name. My sealed juvenile records. A psychiatric evaluation from age 16 after my father's accidental overdose. The doctor's notes mentioned grief, detachment, borderline behavior. Words that had been expunged and erased, or so I thought. The emotional stability folder hit the hardest. There were transcripts of therapy sessions I hadn't even remembered. Phrases I'd muttered in broken moments, now weaponized in cold text. Displays dissociative tendencies. Strong survival instincts. High manipulation index. Dangerous if provoked. Dangerous if provoked. He knew I was a threat, and he married me anyway. But why? I opened the prenuptial strategy file. It detailed not just the legal protections of his assets, but psychological evaluations of how I might respond under pressure. He had mapped my breakdown potential like a business risk. There were even bullet points. Maintain illusion of control. Avoid triggering abandonment fears. Reinforce her role as essential. Limit unsupervised financial access. He had managed me like an investment. I closed the folder, breathing shallowly, feeling the ceiling pressing down on me. My heart pounded against my ribs, hot and angry. I wasn't a person to him. I was a profile. The next night, I stayed awake long after Jonathan had drifted off. He slept like the dead, motionless, mouth slightly open, the way men do when they believe they're untouchable. I watched him and thought about all the nights I laid beside him planning his downfall, unaware he was studying mine. When I couldn't take it anymore, I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot into the closet. Hidden behind racks of designer shoes and custom gowns was a small fireproof lockbox. Inside was the one thing I never trusted to digital records, a black notebook with handwritten accounts, alias contacts, and my deepest secrets. I flipped it open, fingers trembling. Page after page of my plans. How I'd move the money, create distance, eventually leak stories to the press, and walk away with everything he loved in ruins. But now it all felt like a trap. The next morning, I made Jonathan breakfast. Eggs lightly scrambled. Sourdough toast. Pressed orange juice. He glanced up from his tablet and smiled, polite as ever. "I've scheduled a trip to the vineyard next weekend," he said casually. "Thought you could use some fresh air." Fresh air? I almost laughed. Was it a test? A ploy to isolate me? Or a distraction? I nodded and sipped my coffee, hiding the quake beneath my skin. That evening, while he met with his finance team in the East Wing, I returned to the flash drive and did what I'd been avoiding. I opened the encrypted folder. Her father's death. A password prompt blinked on the screen. I typed in the name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Angela. My middle name. My father's favorite. The one he whispered when he was dying. The folder opened, and everything I thought I knew fell apart. Inside were police records, autopsy reports, toxicology, and a private investigator's file. It wasn't an overdose. My father had been poisoned, and there was more emails, transactions, a trail that led straight to a shell company, owned by Jonathan Hamilton. My hand flew to my mouth. It wasn't just that he knew. He did it. He orchestrated it. He killed my father. And then he found me, groomed me, married me, used me. I dropped the laptop onto the bed, stumbling back like it had bitten me. My ears rang. My heart thrashed. This wasn't a power game anymore. It was revenge. But not mine. His. Chapter 3. A room with no mirrors. Grief is a strange thing when it arrives years too late. It doesn't weep gently or announce itself with sympathy. It barges in like a debt collector, grabbing you by the throat and dragging you back into memories you spent a lifetime avoiding. That night, after I opened the folder and saw what Jonathan had done, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even move. I sat there, frozen, in a home I no longer recognized, beside a man I no longer knew, if I ever knew him at all. I felt the hollow kind of grief. The kind that numbs the skin, silences thought, and sinks into the bones like rot. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only stare at the screen until the blue light burned into my vision, and every line on the screen blurred into meaninglessness. But the truth was clear. Jonathan had murdered my father. Not directly. That would be too crude for him. No, he had orchestrated it, funded it, manipulated a series of events that led to my father's death, then covered his tracks beneath layers of proxies, shell companies, and legal fabrications. It wasn't until I saw the final transfer, a payment to a former nurse who worked at the detox clinic where my father had been placed, that I understood the full extent of it. The woman's statement was in the file too. She'd confessed during a private deposition, paid generously to disappear afterward. She'd administered a dose of methadone far beyond the recommended level, slipping it into my father's orange juice. She claimed she was coerced, said she'd received threats, said the man behind it all wore tailored suits and never spoke above a whisper. I didn't need to see his face to know. It was Jonathan, and he'd known me for years before we'd ever met. He sought me out. He lured me into his world. He married me, not as a prize or even a pawn, but as a placeholder. A puppet, maybe a punishment. But why? Why destroy my father, then bind me to him? The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table while he read the financial section of the Times and sipped his black coffee. I watched the slight crease between his brows as he scanned the market updates. Watched the way his fingers tapped the mug like he was keeping time to a rhythm only he could hear. I wanted to reach across the table and stab a knife through his palm. Instead, I smiled. "How's the vineyard trip shaping up?" I asked sweetly. He looked up. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Should be quiet. Just us. No staff. I thought we could use some alone time." Alone? Of course. He wanted to isolate me, probably to gauge how much I knew, maybe even to make me disappear. I nodded, pretending to stir my tea. That sounds perfect. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I opened a hidden panel behind the closet mirror, something I'd had Marcus install a year into our marriage. Inside was a burner phone, 3 passports, and a folded envelope containing an offshore bank login. It was my emergency kit, my insurance policy. But I didn't run. Not yet. I needed answers. I needed control. I sent Marcus a message through encrypted text, "Dig deeper. Everything you can find on Jonathan Pre, 2010. Look for connections to my father. Anything." His reply was immediate. "You sure you're ready for that?" No, I wasn't. But I needed it anyway. 2 hours later, he sent me a file dump. Thousands of documents tagged and indexed. I scanned until my eyes blurred. In 2007, my father had sued a pharmaceutical subsidiary, Montech Labs, for illegal opioid marketing. He'd been a whistleblower, an insider, a man with documents that could have crippled the company. That company at the time had been recently acquired by a private equity firm, Hamilton Equity Group, Jonathan's firm. The timeline fit. My father had gone public. Montech stock had plummeted. Lawsuits had followed. Then suddenly, my father was dead. The case collapsed. Montech restructured. The company survived. The board resigned. And Jonathan came out richer. He'd profited from my father's death. And then, as if tying a bow on the entire tragedy, he'd married the man's daughter. Not out of love, not even out of curiosity, but out of ownership. That night, I walked through the house like a ghost. I paused outside the guest room where I kept the portrait of my father, hidden behind a fake canvas of abstract art. I pulled it out and stared into the eyes that once gave me bedtime stories and Sunday morning pancakes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I hadn't protected him. I hadn't even known what I was walking into. But now I did, and I wouldn't walk away without vengeance. The next morning, I made my way to the West Wing, to the room Jonathan never entered, the solarium. It was my space, my sanctuary, a room full of orchids and succulents, glass walls and no mirrors. Mirrors made it hard to pretend, and pretending was all I had. I sat in the corner chair and replayed every moment of our marriage in my mind. The little things, the strange absences, the quiet calculations, the times he offered unsolicited forgiveness for things I hadn't confessed. He'd always known what I was. He just hadn't known what I could become. I reached for my notebook and began to write again. Not plans this time, not exit strategies, but questions. 1. What does Jonathan want now? 2. What is his endgame? 3. What does he think I'll do next? I wrote until my fingers cramped. And then I made a decision. I would go to the vineyard. I would play the perfect wife. I would listen, observe, and when the time was right, I'd strike. But not with a gun, with the truth. Because somewhere buried beneath all his layers of control, there had to be a vulnerability. And I would find it. I would become the mirror he refused to look into. And when I did, I'd make sure he shattered. Chapter 4, The Vineyard. It was a 5-hour drive to the vineyard. 5 hours of silence, radio static, and the occasional hollow conversation that passed for marital intimacy. Jonathan drove the Bentley himself, as if the act of gripping the steering wheel gave him some illusion of control. I sat beside him, legs crossed, hands folded, sunglasses shielding my eyes from both the sun and the man who'd buried the truth so deep. It took me years to even realize I was drowning in it. He didn't ask what I packed. I didn't ask why we weren't flying. The road wound through forested hills and valleys that looked too perfect to be real, like something out of a painting. Picturesque, serene, deceitful. The closer we got, the more suffocated I felt. I'd always thought of nature as a kind of sanctuary, but here, surrounded by trees tall enough to swallow the sky, I felt trapped. Like something was watching us. Or maybe waiting. The vineyard was nestled in a secluded estate Jonathan had purchased years ago but rarely visited. I'd only been there once, shortly after our honeymoon. It was supposed to be a romantic escape, but I remembered how he barely touched me. How he spent hours in the study reviewing files while I drank alone on the balcony, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Now I knew I had. The main house was a stunning stone structure with arched windows, heavy oak doors, and balconies that overlooked rows of perfectly aligned vines. Inside, the air was cool and stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. No staff greeted us. Just the echo of our footsteps on marble floors and the creak of wood under our weight. Jonathan gave me a brief tour I didn't need. I followed, nodding in all the right places, memorizing the layout. 2 bedrooms, a wine cellar, a study with no visible cameras, a basement door he didn't mention. We settled into separate rooms. He claimed it was for comfort, but we both knew it was about control. That night he made dinner, rosemary lamb with roasted potatoes and a decanted red so old it probably predated my trauma. We ate on the terrace, the sun melting into the hills behind us. "I remember the first time I brought you here," he said, swirling his wine. "You were quieter then." "I was learning," I replied softly, not meeting his eyes. "Learning what?" "How to be yours." He paused. His eyes lingered on me too long. "And now I wonder who taught me that." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You always did have a sharp tongue beneath that sugar." "So did you," I wanted to say. "But yours was laced with cyanide." Later, after he retreated to his study, I explored. Carefully, quietly. The house felt like a mausoleum, full of luxury void of life. I found remnants of past visits, half-smoked cigars, a silk scarf I didn't recognize, a photograph in the trash of Jonathan, and a woman I'd never seen. Blonde, elegant, smiling like she knew a secret. Wife number 2, maybe. I searched the study while he was in the bath. His laptop was locked with biometric security, but the drawers weren't. Inside, I found a folder labeled Estate Disposition. It detailed properties, shell accounts, trust movements. My name appeared only once, in a section titled Disposition Strategy, Contingency Spouse. Contingency. Like I was a backup plan. A fucking placeholder. I copied the file with a burner flash drive and returned everything to its original state. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as I slipped down the hallway and locked myself in the guest room. I opened the file. According to the documents, Jonathan was preparing to liquidate assets. Quietly, efficiently. Some were being moved offshore, others funneled through names I didn't recognize. But the most disturbing part wasn't the movement of wealth. It was the timeline. The file was timestamped 2 months ago. Around the same time, he began sleeping in separate rooms. Around the same time, he stopped touching me. He was preparing for something. Maybe my departure. Maybe my death. The next day, we walked the vineyard grounds together, a charade of marital bliss under the morning sun. He pointed out varietals, talked about soil acidity and aging barrels. I nodded, smiled, let him think I was still playing the role. But every step I took, I was mapping my escape. And my counterstrike. That evening, he poured us wine on the balcony and said, "You've been quiet again." "Must be the grapes," I replied. He turned, leaned against the railing, and studied me. "I've always admired your strength," he said. "Even when you lied." I didn't flinch. "You mean like you did?" He raised his glass in mock salute. "Touché." The silence between us thickened. It wasn't the silence of marriage. It was the silence of war. The kind where neither side is ready to fire, but both are loading the gun. That night, I returned to the basement door. It was unlocked. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I descended into darkness. The air was damp, cold. The scent of mildew and aged wood clung to everything. And then I found it. A room, windowless, cement walls, a single overhead light, and a file cabinet bolted to the floor. Inside, documents. Hundreds. Surveillance logs. Bank records. Names. Faces. Notes on people I'd never met, journalists, competitors, former spouses. And me. a folder thicker than the rest. Every move I'd made since we married. Every call, every transaction, every meeting with Marcus. Even my therapy appointments, the ones I'd taken under a fake name in a clinic across town. He knew. He'd always known. He'd let me build my little scheme. Watched me orchestrate my betrayal. And now he was going to cash it in. But I wasn't done yet. I had one advantage. He thought I was broken. He thought I was emotional, reactive, impulsive. But what he didn't know was that everything he taught me about deception, I'd already known. And now I was going to use it. Because I wasn't here to escape. I was here to win. Chapter 5, The Contingency Plan. I didn't sleep the night I found the basement. I couldn't. The image of that room, windowless, cold, lined with metal cabinets filled with my sins, replayed in my mind like a fever dream I couldn't wake from. It wasn't just that he knew what I was doing. It was how long he'd known, how methodical he'd been, how deep his reach extended. Every transaction, every phone call, every appointment, even my burner accounts weren't safe. He hadn't just monitored me. He'd studied me, anticipated me, outmaneuvered me before I ever made my first move. And I had to face a brutal truth. Jonathan didn't build his empire by being lucky. He built it by knowing people better than they knew themselves, and using that knowledge like a scalpel. By morning, I'd already rewritten my own plans. The old ones were obsolete, reactive, emotional. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. There was no place he hadn't already mapped. No name I could use he hadn't already flagged. He knew my tendencies, my rage, my resilience. But what he didn't know, what I had never shown him, was that I could change. That I could be patient. That I could lie like him. Breakfast was quiet. Eggs again. Toast. We drank our coffee facing the hills, a picture-perfect scene of domestic bliss. He wore a navy sweater over a white Oxford shirt. I wore linen soft pink, like innocence painted in fabric. I'd braided my hair loosely and dabbed rose oil behind my ears, the scent he always associated with our early days. He was trying to lull me. I was trying to lull him back. He handed me a cup of tea and brushed his fingers across my palm. A calculated touch. A warning masked as affection. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Like the dead," I replied. He smiled. He always smiled when the threat was near. After breakfast, he suggested we walk through the northern rows of the vineyard. The ground was softer there. The path narrower. The kind of place where no one would hear you scream if you slipped and cracked your skull on a rock. I wore boots anyway. We talked about harvest yields and grape acidity. I matched his pace, mirrored his tone, laughed in all the right places. But I kept count of every turn, every stone, every slope. My mind was a battlefield now, and every second was reconnaissance. He paused at one point, kneeling to check the soil like he was suddenly a vintner. Then he looked up at me with that quiet amusement he wore like a second skin. "I underestimated you once," he said. "I won't do it again." I tilted my head, blinking against the sunlight. "That's funny. I was just thinking the same thing." We stared at each other for a breath too long. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. "Come on, let's go inside. You should rest." Rest. I was beginning to understand what that word meant when he said it. It didn't mean sleep. It meant surrender. It meant obedience. It meant, stay soft so I don't have to break you. That evening, while he took a conference call from the upstairs study, I made my move. I slipped down the hallway and returned to the basement, this time with gloves and a burner camera. I took photos of every document in my folder, every receipt, every surveillance log. I moved quickly, methodically, swallowing the bile rising in my throat as I saw just how thoroughly I had been dissected. And then I found something new. A black envelope labeled, Secondary Deployment, Asset M Fall Strategy. Inside were copies of text messages. Not mine, not his, Marcus's. Dozens of them, between him and Jonathan. Conversations that spanned months. At first, I thought they were forged. But then I saw the signature encryption strings. They were real. Jonathan had flipped him. Or maybe Marcus had never been on my side to begin with. I stared at the last exchange. "Marcus, she's close to finishing the transfer. 2 weeks max. Jonathan, don't push her. Let her believe it's working. Marcus, what about after? Jonathan, after she won't be a problem." My knees buckled. I sat down hard on the concrete floor, the air knocked out of my lungs. Marcus was my only contingency, the only person who knew everything, my only lifeline, and he'd sold me out. I couldn't scream, couldn't cry. I had to get back upstairs before Jonathan noticed I was gone. I slipped the envelope into the waistband of my pants, covered it with my sweater, and climbed the stairs in slow, silent agony. Upstairs, the house was still. He was still on the call, pacing in the study with his back to the door. I went to my room, shut the door, and collapsed. He was closing in. He wanted me to finish the transfer. He wanted me to do the dirty work. And then he'd make me disappear. I couldn't let that happen. I stayed up all night rewriting my digital footprint, rerouting offshore wires, creating fake failures in the network. I sent Marcus a message from a ghost account. New protocol. Too hot. Stand down until further notice. Then I sent a second message to someone else. A name Jonathan didn't know. A woman I hadn't spoken to in years. One of the few people in my life who owed me a favor she could never repay. I told her to book a flight. Told her to pack a specific bag. Told her to be ready to play a role she'd never auditioned for. Then I destroyed the burner phone. By morning, I was calm. Jonathan asked if I wanted to go into town. I smiled and said, "Only if you drive." He laughed. "Always." We left the house by 10. He took the scenic route. I took mental notes of every curve. By noon, I'd made a choice. I was done playing defense. He thought he had a contingency plan. But so did I. And mine had just begun. Chapter 6, The Substitute Wife. She arrived 2 days later. A silver sedan rolled through the private gates of the Vineyard estate just after noon, sun bouncing off the windshield like a secret too bright to look at directly. Jonathan was on a business call in the study, the door shut, his voice measured and low. I watched the car from the balcony, fingers gripping the iron rail tight enough to hurt. My stomach twisted, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that comes when you know the next move you make will either save your life or end it. Her name was Elise. She was a former theater actress turned off-the-grid survivalist, someone I'd met during a brief stint in Alaska, years before I ever heard the name Jonathan Hamilton. Back then, I was hiding from another kind of man. Elise had patched up my broken wrist, shared her whiskey, and told me she believed in two things: premeditation and performance. That was all I needed to know. She stepped out of the car in a beige trench coat and dark sunglasses, her blonde curls tucked into a loose bun, her face calm but unreadable. To anyone watching, she was my cousin, a mental health counselor sent at my husband's request to help me recalibrate in the midst of stress. To me, she was the chess piece that could flip the board. Jonathan hadn't expected her. Of course not. That was the point. I met her in the foyer, smiling as if we hadn't seen each other in years. Which, in truth, we hadn't. I embraced her, whispered the safe word we'd chosen, asterisk, and felt her nod ever so slightly against my shoulder. "It's so good to see you," I said loudly. "You too," she replied, eyes flicking up the staircase, already scanning for cameras. We had 30 seconds. Maybe less. "There's tea in the conservatory," I said, walking ahead. "Jonathan will be down shortly. I'll need a moment alone with her," I added once he appeared. "Just to talk through a few personal things before we get into anything clinical." He hesitated. Briefly. A flicker in his eye I'd learned to recognize. Suspicion disguised as accommodation. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Let me know if you need anything." We waited until the door closed. Then Elise turned to me, her entire demeanor changing in a flash. She reached into her coat and pulled out a burner phone and a sleek black flash drive. "This has everything," she said. "Offshore backups, alternate identities, and leverage." "What kind?" I asked. She smiled. "The kind that makes men like Jonathan piss blood." We had 24 hours to make the switch. That was the window I'd calculated. Just enough time to convince him that Elise was here to monitor me, that I was spiraling into stress-fueled instability, and that I needed time, space, and medication. He'd grown comfortable. Arrogant. That was his flaw. That night, Elise sat beside me at dinner and played the part of the concerned cousin with unsettling grace. "She's been having trouble sleeping," Elise said, cutting her lamb into tiny, precise pieces. "There's dissociation. Mild paranoia. But manageable. Nothing that can't be stabilized with time." Jonathan nodded, swirling his wine. "She tends to get that way when she feels cornered." "Don't we all?" Elise replied. His eyes narrowed. He didn't like her. Good. We spent the evening watching a documentary on psychological manipulation. My choice. I watched him watch me as Elise dozed beside me on the couch, her performance flawless. Later, he pulled me aside in the hallway. "She's intense," he said. "She's family," I replied. "She wants what's best for me." "And what do you want?" "To not feel like I'm being followed anymore." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not being followed. You sure? I said, then walked away. That night, Elise and I activated the switch. It began with the server reroute. We redirected all activity from Jonathan's internal network to an offshore mirror system Elise had constructed months ago. Every email, file, financial ping, duplicated and backed up in real time. Then we launched the psychological phase. The next morning, I staged a panic attack. Hyperventilated, locked myself in the bathroom, screamed, cried, whispered about cameras in my skin. He tried to comfort me. I pushed him away. Elise intervened. She needs sedation, she told him. Nothing heavy, just something to level her. He agreed. While he was distracted with my crisis, Elise used the time to access the basement again. She photographed every file I hadn't gotten to. Then she found something else. A locked drawer in the back of the cabinet. Inside, a necklace. Not mine. Not wife number 2's. But wife number 1. Elise showed it to me that night. I recognized the design from an article I'd found years ago. Jonathan's first wife had gone missing in the Alps. A climbing accident. Body never recovered. Now I knew why. He kept a souvenir. We needed to leave. Soon. The next morning, Jonathan made breakfast. Eggs again. Toast. Orange juice. He handed me my plate with a tenderness I didn't trust. I think Elise should leave tomorrow, he said. I don't think she's helping. She is, I replied. More than you know. His eyes flickered. That day, I found my suitcase in the hallway. Unzipped. Tossed. Searched. He knew. Not everything, but enough to be dangerous. I ran to Elise. We leave tonight. We packed in silence. No panic. No wasted movement. At 3:12 a.m., we crept down the hall. And that's when we saw him. Jonathan. Standing in the foyer. Fully dressed. Holding the necklace. She was difficult too, he said, his voice calm. But not as creative as you. Elise stepped forward. You should move. He didn't. I gave you everything, he said, eyes locked on mine. And you chose war. No, I whispered. You chose war the moment you buried my father. The silence stretched like a blade between us. Then, without a word, he turned and walked into the dark. We ran. Out the door. Into the car. And didn't stop until the sun came up. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because you can't just run from a man like Jonathan Hamilton. You have to dismantle him. Brick by brick. Lie by lie. And I was ready to do just that. Chapter 7. The Final Move. I didn't sleep for 3 days after we left the vineyard. My body was with Elise in a safe house outside Charleston. A converted farmhouse surrounded by nothing but overgrown fields and barbed wire fences. But my mind was still in the basement of the Hamilton Vineyard estate, staring into the abyss of those files, that necklace, and the last cold flicker of Jonathan's eyes. He hadn't stopped us. He let us go. And that terrified me more than if he had chased us down with a gun in the middle of the night. Jonathan Hamilton didn't let go of things. He studied them, controlled them, kept them in glass cages. So if he didn't stop us, it meant one thing. He already knew where we were going. He was already ahead. The only way to beat him now was to stop playing defense. To stop hiding. To stop running. I had to go after the very thing he cherished most, his illusion of invincibility, his spotless reputation, his curated power. I spent those 3 days building a war room. Elise and I mapped out every shell company, every trust, every non-existent offshore account he had funneled money into over the last 10 years. The flash drives we collected gave us blueprints. The mirrored server Elise rerouted at the vineyard gave us timestamps and access logs. We pulled phone records, tax filings, and internal memos tied to Montech Labs, the same pharmaceutical company my father had tried to expose. And then I found it, a file buried so deep it was protected by double encryption and a biometric lock code. But I had the fingerprint, Jonathan's, lifted from the wine glass he handed me that last morning at the vineyard. Inside the file was a full archive of correspondence between Jonathan and high-ranking board members of Montech Labs from 2007 to 2012, emails, voice memos, even scanned signatures on bribe contracts. Documents that proved Montech paid to falsify drug trial results, that they paid off FDA officials, that they silenced whistleblowers, that they targeted my father. This was the nail in his empire. This was my revenge. We spent another week assembling a media package. I used an alias I hadn't touched in 5 years, Renee Valmont, and posed as a freelance investigative journalist. Elise edited the documents, tagged them with source references, timestamp verifications, and legal commentary. She reached out to a friend who worked at an independent news network known for exposing white-collar corruption. They bid immediately. Within 48 hours, the network launched a teaser campaign. Coming Sunday, inside the corporate giant that poisoned America. A legacy of lies. A death tied to a billionaire. I knew Jonathan saw it, because 30 minutes after the promo aired, I received a message on my encrypted laptop. Subject line, "You're not as clever as you think." Body, "I gave you the illusion of freedom. Don't mistake it for mercy." No signature. No need for one. It was him. But I didn't respond. I let silence do the talking. Because that's what he feared most, irrelevance. The loss of control. Being unable to steer the narrative. That was my weapon now. His silence would echo louder than his power ever could. The exposé aired 3 nights later. It was a bombshell. Jonathan's name was connected directly to the Montec cover-up. My father's death was highlighted with full audio from the private investigator's testimony. Elise narrated the voiceover. Her voice was measured, sharp, impossible to ignore. The fallout was immediate. Stock prices crashed. Regulatory investigations reopened. 2 board members were arrested within days. A 3rd fled to the Cayman Islands. The House Committee on Health summoned Jonathan for an inquiry. And then he disappeared. Gone. No trace. His lawyers issued a brief statement. Mr. Hamilton is cooperating fully and has taken a temporary leave to attend to personal matters. Bullshit. He was hiding. But it wouldn't last. I had made sure of that. I sent every unredacted file to the Department of Justice. I posted anonymous copies on whistleblower forums. I uploaded everything to a decentralized blockchain system that made the data impossible to erase. I didn't want justice hidden behind courtrooms. I wanted it everywhere. I wanted the world to choke on the truth the same way my father had choked on that poisoned orange juice. And still, it didn't feel finished. Not until I stood outside the Hamilton estate one last time. It was dusk. The gate was ajar. No guards. No cameras blinking red. I walked in wearing the same cream dress I'd worn the day I moved in. A ghost retracing her steps. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I found him in the study. Jonathan. Thinner. Paler. Eyes sunken like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't flinch when he saw me. "Come to gloat?" he asked. "No," I said. "I came to end it." He stood slowly. "You already ended it. There's nothing left." "There's always something left," I said. "The question is, do you want it destroyed or delivered?" He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. There was one file I hadn't released. One that tied him to an offshore assassination network. The kind of file that didn't just ruin careers. It erased legacies. He stared at me for a long time. Then he poured a glass of whiskey, handed it to me, and sat down. "You win," he said. I didn't drink it. "You made me into a monster," he said. "No," I whispered. "You were already one. I just peeled off the mask." I left him there, in that mansion built from stolen lives and burned bridges. And when I stepped outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Free. For the first time in years, I wasn't acting. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't hiding. I was exactly who I was meant to be. A survivor. A strategist. And finally, a woman who didn't need a man's empire to burn it to the ground. The end.